When I first heard the song Everything is Free Now by Gillian Welch, I didn't know what inspired it, and I interpreted it very differently from the artist's intention. Hearing the first line, I imagined some futuristic post-scarcity society. The big score, what had been figured out, was how to provide for all people's basic needs outside of a socioeconomic system that values labor more than people. A society where no one has to spend 40 hours a week at a low-paying, mind-numbing job that makes money for someone richer while disconnecting us from everything that gives our lives meaning. In such a future, artists would do it anyway, even though it doesn't pay, and share their work freely and happily with an audience because their basic needs have already been met. The drive for artists to create, innovate, and share their work would stem entirely from inspiration and social connections. Now, the first verse should have clued me in, but I was already in socialist utopia la la land, so the singer, considering tip jars, getting a straight job, and working hard, I read all that as gravy. As in, yeah, you got a safe home, enough food, access to medical care and education, but as an artist, you might create more visibility for your work, and you might have an idea for some big, ambitious project. And achieving those kinds of goals, that might require a little more effort and funding. The second verse fit easily into my interpretation. The artist creates, whether they're ambitious or not. If they're an artist, it just happens. The musician wakes up humming a song, and she realizes that in this new reality, she doesn't have to hustle anymore. She can share or not share her creative work on her own terms. She is liberated. And not just her, other people, those who don't call themselves artists, they can sing the songs they like themselves. After all, they have the time and energy to do that now because everything is free. Making music can be really fun and satisfying, even if you're not good at it. And who cares if you suck? It's not like anyone has to perform publicly or impress others, unless they want to. At this point, anyone familiar with Gillian Welch's song is convinced that I'm pretty darn naive for my interpretation. So, what does the song Everything is Free Now really mean? In 2018, Gillian Welch was interviewed by Jonathan Bernstein specifically to discuss Everything is Free and the song's popularity among today's up-and-coming musicians. As it turns out, the song was written 20 years ago during the Napster controversy. Napster's peer-to-peer file-sharing software enabled people all over the world to suddenly access a seemingly endless supply of music for free. Obviously, this resulted in losses for record companies and musicians who owned the copyrights to those songs. More importantly, this new technological development posed a serious threat to the whole music industry as it existed at that time. Napster faced lawsuits, first from Metallica and eventually from an alliance of record companies, and was soon ordered to shut down its entire network and pay copyright owners a multi-million-dollar settlement. When all this went down, Gillian Welch's hard-earned professional career as a musician was still very young, and the song expresses the anguish she felt about the possibility of losing it. Of course, today, debates over copyright, distribution, and how to compensate artists in the age of the internet rages on. Many musicians who are in the early stage of a real professional career, as Welch was 20 years ago, are feeling frustrated by how little they can earn from streaming services. Thus, the resurgence of interest in Welch's song among young musicians. Jonathan Bernstein describes the song as a gently strummed folk lament that details the existential fear brought on when the labor of a working person suddenly loses its value overnight. Okay, so that's like how the jobs of over 4 million cashiers in America are being replaced by machines. Although, that's not really the best comparison since cashiers arguably do their jobs for the paycheck, one of those straight jobs the song mentioned, while artists do it for the love and then find ways to monetize their passion. In the interview, Welch said, "It's about feeling like my personal creative independence was threatened." That's more specific to people who have achieved both creative and financial independence through their labor. And that, Well, that's a position few people will ever be fortunate enough to find themselves in. Welch continued saying, I hate those people who get on their high horse and say, art is pure, do it anyway. Of course I'm going to do it anyway, but I'm not going to do it outside my home. This is what I do. It's what I've done since I was 7 years old. But from the time I was 7 until I was 18, I only performed my songs in my bedroom. It was only once I realized I was going to have to get a job that I started to do it professionally. This is the point when I have to mention that I, too, am an artist. The visual type, not the musician type. Although the same issues I'm addressing in this video apply to both, as well as to other types of artists, such as actors and dancers. When I say I am an artist, what I mean is that I have years of formal training and practice, including an MFA degree. For years, I have maintained a studio space and consistent studio practice. I regularly show in galleries and sometimes even museums. My work is in a few collections at art centers, colleges, and libraries. I've also been offered and accepted a few artist fellowships and residencies. That all sounds pretty professional, right? Yeah, I don't make any money off my art. I mean, I make some, but it's just enough to support my art making, not my living. The most I ever earned in a year off the sales of my art was $4,000, and that was right before the economic downturn of 2008. I have financially survived through a mix of family support, pooling resources with my working spouse, and teaching. Lots of teaching. That's really why you're looking at a picture of Bob Ross. And here's the thing, my situation is far more common than that of the artist who achieves financial independence through their artistic labor. At least if we're talking about artists who also maintain total creative independence. Going back to Welch's statement, I wonder who were the people on their high horses telling her to do it anyway? Were they fellow artists? And if so, were they among the small minority of professional artists who can make a good, stable living off their artistic labor? In that case, that would be pretty insensitive to Welch's anxieties about losing her income, and with it much of the time and energy that she devotes to her music. Or were they among the majority of artists who haven't managed to directly make a living off our art? Those such people might have been insensitive to Welch's fears because what she feared is already our reality. Maybe those high horse people weren't artists at all. Maybe they were among those lucky folks who have a highly lucrative and personally satisfying profession outside of the arts, and who, unfortunately, often assume that producing art is easy and fun. Lots of non-working artists don't realize that telling us artists to work a day job and keep up our practice is telling us to work 2 full-time careers. That's just not feasible for most people, especially if they have dependents or health problems, and frankly, it's not healthy for anyone. Or maybe the high horse people were among the majority of working Americans, people who must work some humdrum job that probably doesn't pay that well, 40 hours a week or so, just so they can pay the bills. In that case, maybe they wanted to encourage Welch, an incredibly talented musician who makes beautiful, powerful music, to do it anyway, because her talent shared with others makes life that is often dull and unsatisfying more worth living. In the interview, Welch defended her professional career against those who would say that her artistic practice was less pure because she got paid. I do think that the idea that the work of a paid artist is automatically tainted is pretty ridiculous. I mean, sure, lots of art is made worse when people try to maximize profit, but just because money is involved doesn't mean artists will diminish the quality of their work. And no doubt there are examples of some artists who made some really cool things because they desperately needed some cash. But Welch goes too far by seeming to claim that her work is more pure because she's a paid professional. She said, "What I get by having music be the only thing I do is that I invest everything in it. I take a risk. Some deep things happen when you bet on your art to sustain you." The key word I focus on there is risk. I think that word is dead on. Many artists will never be able to take the sort of risks Welch took because of factors outside of our control. Many others will take those risks and it won't pan out for them. Does that make our art less pure? less valuable? I think it means we just produce less art. 20 years after she wrote Everything is Free Now, Gillian Welch is still a financially independent musician. She and her musical partner David Rawlings have managed to carve out a highly successful career. In the interview, Welch herself laments that her story probably won't be that for so many talented young musicians who will try and fail to earn a living wage off their artistic labor. 99% of streaming income goes to the top 10% of tracks, and depending on fans to buy show tickets, albums, merchandise, or make donations to Patreon accounts, that just isn't enough. I was in college when the Napster controversy happened. It was college students who used the software the most, and I was no exception. By making a broad collection of free music widely available, Napster briefly turned music into a public good, basically expanding on the role of public libraries. I was thrilled to discover all kinds of weird and wonderful music that I'd never heard before. I hardly ever bought CDs. I was working at a coffee house and going to school and already paying for rent, food, utilities, and art supplies, so there wasn't anything left over for a music budget. In the interview, when Welch speaks of her anger and says that she wants people to feel the unjustness, the robbery, the theft, I just don't care. I was never going to spend money on all that music I listened to because of Napster. I didn't have that money to spend. The whole guilting people into supporting artists at best succeeds in creating yet another very small percentage of artists making a living. Most will continue to be left behind. It's wonderful when any artist manages to devote themselves entirely to their practice, either because they've managed to successfully monetize it or they have someone supporting them. But none of that addresses the problems with a system in which most people who do a tremendous amount of creative labor have few means of obtaining much, if any, compensation for that labor. A lot of people talk about how capitalism encourages growth and innovation. But as the song says, we artists are going to do it anyway. And maybe more importantly, what's the point of growth and innovation in art if most people can't afford to enjoy that art? It seems like if everyone, including the people with straight jobs, simply had more, like a basic income, affordable housing, free health care, daycare, education, more artists could afford the risk of making art our main occupation, and everyone else could afford to enjoy more of what artists produce. Wouldn't that be something?
Everything is free now. That's what they say. Everything I ever done, gonna give it away. Someone hit the big score. They figured it out that we're gonna do it anyway. Even if it doesn't pay, well, I could get a tip jar, gas up the car. We'll try to make a little change or some candy down at the bar. Or I could get a straight job. I've done it before. I never minded working hard. It's who I'm working for. 'Cause everything is free now. That's what they say. Everything I ever done, gonna give it away. Someone hit the big score. They figured it out that we're gonna do it anyway, even if it doesn't pay. Well, every day I wake up humming a song, but I don't need to run around. I just stay home and sing a little love song, my love and myself. what you want to hear, you can sing it yourself. 'Cause everything is free now. That's what I said. No one has to listen